January fui bún urdi a trucashe. I'm now moving on to take leaders' questions under Standing Order 36. Agus Morris Ganok just Nishrianta Ame Mosh the Hella a Colino.
Can I begin today by extending my deepest sympathy and the sympathies of my party, Sinn Féin, to the family of Saoirse Ruan. She inspired, I think, all of us in this House. She inspired the Toy Show appeal, and she inspired all of us right throughout the state in her battle with her illness. Agus Yesje Goroa Hanum. I'm thinking of her, all of her friends, her colleagues, and especially her family today. And may I also make a final appeal to voters before the referendums tomorrow, and appeal for them to come out and to vote. And we see the proposed changes as small steps forward, and on balance we've advocated a yes vote in both referendums. But whatever the results, this must be a catalyst for meaningful change for people with disability, for those who need care and their carers. And I would appeal to the government to deliver the long overdue rights and supports that are badly needed. Tánaiste a new Clonian Midge Golan IPHA Golan Kogal Nation Daku Agus Tisha de Giru Jerisha and Amata a Glakuin good 5 minutes lanche, La Drogi Nua, Drogi Ure, Agus Drogi a Hikla Takiar the Hort Dini, Agus Behadinia Hewal, Gwisha a Glaku Wad Ra, the Lina Drogi Shaw Hort Eran Waragu, Agus Kai Shaw out Studger Jantini, Studger for the Shaw, Agus Tamajinia cool O Europe de O Shaw. It's highlighted today, Tánaiste in the Irish Pharmaceutical Healthcare Association, who's holding its annual conference, that the length of time that it's taken for the health service to approve the availability of new drugs, which has the potential to make real life-changing differences to the lives of patients in all of our constituencies, every part of this island. There are innovative and life-changing drugs that save lives. And many of these drugs are being produced here in Ireland. They're being produced in your own home county of Cork and elsewhere. Well, many Irish patients are among the last that receive them in Europe. And the question is how is this fair? So drugs that are being produced down the road, but in Europe, we're some of the last on the line to actually get access to these drugs. These, obviously, we need careful consideration, and a balance always has to be struck when we're looking at the issue of new drugs. But if you're a cancer patient, if you're a patient with a rare disease, the industry have said very clearly that Ireland is a laggard in this. When we compare ourselves to our European partners, we're at the bottom of the list in relation to access to these life-changing drugs. And we also have, to add injury to insult, we have a two-tier system where a patient that has private health insurance gets rapid access to these drugs once they're approved by the EMA, while patients who don't have the money for private health insurance has to wait a long drawn-out process, in some cases years, for the HSE to approve these drugs. And we all know the human impact of this. We also know what's the problem. We've seen the reports being published in relation to this, a process that's convoluted and beset by staffing capacity problems. If staff are not there to process these approvals, then the problems and the delays are going to continue. And there is uncertainty about the future funding streams for drugs, and we've seen that in the recent budget where the government didn't allocate any new money for additional the provision of new drugs. We called you out in this in Sinn Féin, the industry called you out in it, the professionals called you out in it, and you had to do a U-turn on that issue. But that's not the way to manage this crucial issue, and that's the problem. We have the steady flow of new drugs coming on stream, but we don't have multi-annual funding or adequate staffing to ensure that patients can secure timely and life-saving access to them. The average wait time in this state is around 2 years for new drugs to be approved by the HSE, and Tánaiste, that's simply far too long. I've heard you, when you were on this side of the House, you were raising exactly these same issues when you were raising issues, for example, in terms of Orkambi, in terms of cystic fibrosis patients, and nothing has changed. Nothing has changed, despite you and your Minister, Fianna Fáil member, being in government for 4 years. So you're well aware of the issues, you're well aware of the length and time, and we're talking about life-changing drugs that can save the lives of people with rare diseases, with cancer, and there's huge frustration. So can I ask you, will you ensure that there's a multi-funding provided to provide a clear and predictable budget for the HSE to manage a continuous supply of new medicines? And will you ensure that the staffing capacity that's pointed out to government last year, and you still haven't done anything about it, the staffing has not been increased, and therefore patients in my constituency and your constituency are waiting over 2 years for drugs to be approved. But if you have private health care, you can get them straight away.
First of all, I would like also to take the opportunity to offer my deepest condolences to the family of Saoirse Rowan, her parents Ollie and Rosanna, sisters and all who knew and loved her. I was fortunate enough to meet Saoirse at Croke Park some years ago. I was very much struck by her radiant smile, her warm personality, and indeed her love of sport and of Gaelic games. And Saoirse inspired so many people with her positivity, her courage, and has left an extraordinary legacy through the RT Toy Show appeal, Arieshte Gorev Hanam Dealish. Could I say to the Deputy in the first instance that it's worth recalling and pointing out that about €3 billion is spent by the state now on medicines on an annual basis. That's an enormous sum of money. And it's important that we always strive to get value for money in terms of the spending of that €3 billion and also in terms of the outcomes for patients. The HSE has approved about 148 new medicines in the past 3 years from 98 million of new medicines funding. So it's not true to say nothing has happened, and I have raised these issues when I was in opposition. And since we came into government, there has been additional money every year. And so in the last 3 years, 98 million, with 148 new medicines approved, and the total expenditure in that basket is about 327 million to the end of 2023. And then we've made 30 million available this year for new drugs, 20 million in new government investment, and the HSE has been requested to identify 10 million in efficiencies, which will be reinvested in new medicines. The Minister has announced an additional 35 staff this morning in terms of the corporate pharma unit in the HSE. That's very welcome news to fill positions that have been vacant as a result of people moving on to other areas. The Minister has also agreed to create a tracker to monitor the journey of a medicine through the administrative process. The Irish Pharma Healthcare Association is the industry lobby group. That's fair, and they lobby on behalf of the industry in respect of new medicines and in terms of the pricing around medicines, and they would say that they have a good and robust relationship with the Minister. The health technology assessment, as you know, is carried out primarily by the Centre for Pharmacoeconomics. The association says that they have a good working, professional, robust relationship with that aspect of it. They are concerned about administrative delays in terms of when it comes out of the CPE, it moves into the HSE to a drug group, a drug that evaluates the drugs and so on in terms of value for money and that. And it's important. So the idea is to get that process speeded up. And their view is it takes too long. On the other hand, if it's estimated that, say, take last year, if we had accepted the original prices that the industry would have put forward in terms of all the new drugs, we would have spent about 400 million extra, whereas actually we spent 200 million. So there is a need for a fairly robust engagement here with the industry on an ongoing annual basis in respect of drugs that come forward. In terms of rare diseases and orphan drugs, which I have a particular interest in, and I know Deputy Padraig O'Sullivan in particular and others have been very strong advocates of this area, and John Lahart, about, there has been significant progress on that in terms of the working group establishment and so forth. But I think we're anxious to work with industry to see can we develop a more effective approach in terms of offering medicines in terms of a fast-track assessment process. And I think that is something that is under consideration.
Minister, you talk about the frustration, like the approval, and I mentioned there always has to be balance and there always has to be consideration. But the approval of a new drug is supposed to take 180 days. The facts are, you talk about rare diseases, you talk about those with cancer patients. We're at the bottom of the list in terms of Europe, in terms of accessing these drugs. That's a fact. All through your term in government, that is the situation. If you're Irish, you're likely to be one of the last in the line to access these drugs that are being produced in the main in Ireland, in some cases down the road from you. But that only applies if you're a public patient. Because if you're a private patient, if you have money, if you can afford private healthcare, you can get rapid access to these drugs. And these aren't just drugs of convenience. These are drugs that keep people alive. There are people, there are lives that will be saved, and there has lives that have been lost as a result of the delays in processing these drugs. I'm not questioning whether we're making money available for new drugs or whether new drugs are coming in stream. What we're questioning is why are we the laggard in Europe in relation to this here? You have an expert report since last year. You've now set up an expert working group. I'm sure when they report to you, you'll set up an expert cabinet committee and then an expert implementation group. And yet, right throughout your term in government, we are the laggard in Europe in relation to processing and approving drugs for public patients that can save lives. And that's not acceptable.
Well, first of all, I don't accept that. And you did say at the outset that there was no new money this year. There was. There's 30 million has been made available. And you said nothing had changed since the government came in. Sorry, I said nothing had changed. In fact, 98 million of new money has been provided since this government came in for new medicines, 148 new medicines in the past 3 years, 39 new drugs, new uses of existing drugs with an orphan designation. And by orphan, we mean drugs for rare diseases, and they're termed orphan drugs because of that. And we spend $3 billion a year on medicines. That's not inconsiderable, Deputy, and we're not the laggard across Europe. We wouldn't accept that at all. And in fact, we would be a laggard in terms of the use of generic drugs relative to others across Europe. And I think the key issue, and these, there was about, as I said, in the last 3 years, about 61 new drugs or new uses of existing drugs for use in oncology alone, in cancer alone. So it's a very rapidly moving area, particularly in terms of immunotherapy drugs and so on. Very rapid. And the funding has gone up exponentially over time. So you do need a system to evaluate this and make sure we get best value for money. And I'm in favour, I'm of a principle that is disposed to, as fast as possible, getting drugs that people need to the people
we're way beyond
that
time.
need them.
Thank you. Tomeg bugger raipigi on Kate Canada Ella a shopta Holly Cairns Moshe the hell.
Margaret Lascan Corla. Tarnished to powerful countries in the West, all of whom claim to value human rights and international law, have been revealed by the war in Gaza as immoral hypocrites. They only value international law when it's their enemies, not their allies, are in breach. Their shameful record in Gaza amounts to the normalisation of mass murder and devastation. They wag their fingers at the Israeli government occasionally, but continue to support them and to arm them. It's their bombs and their bullets that have killed more than 30,000 Palestinians. It's not just the United States that are engaged in this. Arms exports from Germany to Israel have increased tenfold since October. Weapons from Germany now make up nearly 30% of Israel's total military imports. Genocide is a nice little earner for the German arms industry. The UK has said that it has concerns that Israel may be breaching international human rights law, but those concerns have not stopped them selling weapons to Israel. Far from it. There has not been a single pause in supply. How much more suffering can people in Gaza endure? How much more death and destruction are Western countries willing to facilitate? Is there any upper limit? Any point at which world leaders will be sickened enough to act? Because Taoiseach, children in Gaza who managed to survive an unprecedented bombardment are now dying of starvation. They're dying from hunger while thousands of trucks packed with food aid are lined up for miles at the border crossing. The Israeli government are denying entry to that aid. They are making a deliberate choice to starve these children. Let's not pretend otherwise. This isn't just callous and clinical, it is a flagrant breach of the recent ruling of the International Court of Justice. The ICJ ordered immediate and effective measures to protect Palestinians from genocide by ensuring sufficient humanitarian assistance to Gaza. The response of the Israeli government has been to reduce the supply of aid and starve the population. Their contempt for international law could not be clearer. Taoiseach, just because many countries in the West have lost their moral compass, it doesn't mean we have to. Given we are in a minority in advocating for Gaza, there is even more of an obligation on us to act. I've repeatedly acknowledged that the Irish government has been strong in its condemnation of Israel's brutality, but I and people all over Ireland are still waiting for you to follow those words with actions. As a sovereign country, there are things we could do that we don't need an international consensus for. The Dáil could sit over recess to enact the Occupied Territories Bill or the Illegal Israeli Settlement Divestment Bill. We could issue travel bans for violent Israeli settlers, including those in the Israeli government. We could recognise the state of Palestine. Taoiseach, will you do those things?
First of all, I would say we have. First of all, I'd say the most important point is Ireland has not lost its moral compass on this issue. I think we should agree on that in this House. And the situation in Gaza is absolutely catastrophic. And I agree with Josep Borrell, EU Vice President and head of the European foreign policy, when he said people should stop sending arms if they want an end to the conflict. And other countries should stop sending arms in order to bring an end to this conflict. Many countries are trying to bring an end to the conflict. And I know that. I have no doubt that many in the US want this to end. But Israel is reckless with its own allies. And Israel is reckless with the region. But above all, it's reckless in terms of the lives of ordinary Gazans and the people of Gaza. Absolutely reckless in terms of allowing what's happening to happen on a daily basis. And what we're witnessing is a complete collapse of cohesion, societal cohesion within Gaza. The shocking scenes last week when 100 people were killed, and clearly many had bullets fired by Israeli forces, but there should be an international investigation into that. But what that represented was the collapse of any order within the area in terms of facilitating distribution of aid, because Gazan police were targeted by Israeli forces when they were helping the UN agencies to distribute the food. And when I spoke to Sigrid Kaag, the UN envoy to the Middle East and to Gaza in particular, she said, without question, we are now in the midst of a collapse. The people are absolutely desperate in Gaza. Their situation is dire. Malnutrition is happening, children, and our priority has been an immediate humanitarian ceasefire. We have worked with the Palestinian Authority, Saudi Arabian Foreign Minister, Jordanian, Egyptian, and others to try and I sent officials over last week to Jordan to work with them in terms of the Arab peace plan that's emerging, and that's imminent, and that's important, and they're liaising with the US and they're liaising with the European Union. And that peace plan is an essential prerequisite, not a prerequisite, but it's essential in the context of any ceasefire that might happen over the next number of days, and we hope it does, because that has to happen. And then there has to be unimpeded access to aid. And Israel has responsibilities under international humanitarian law to protect the civilians at Gaza. Israel is not fulfilling in any shape or form that obligation as an occupying power, and is contributing to the death, obviously, in the bombardment of Gaza, but also in terms of the starvation of the people of Gaza. I welcome the fact that the European Union, and I think we did show leadership and action in respect of UNRWA. We were the first country, I think the only country out first, to say no pause to aid to UNRWA despite what happened and despite what other countries did. And then we followed that up quickly by meeting Filippo Lazzarini, allocating 20 million up front. The European Commission has now reversed its pause and has allocated funding and restarting funding. So that was cause and effect.
Deputy Cairns.
That don't even suggest followed by any kind of actions. I think it's important to look back to it's 1984 when Dunnes Stores workers refused to stock the shelves in Dunnes Stores from products from apartheid South Africa. So never let it be said that a small country can't have an impact. Big or small, it's important in times like this that as a country we stand up and be brave. I've asked you, as a country, the things that we can do without international consensus, recognising the State of Palestine, enacting the Occupied Territories Bill or the Illegal Israeli Settlement Divestment Bill. Are you willing to match any of your words with any kind of action that could send a message, big or small, that could actually have an impact in the face of an impending genocide? Children are now starving. European countries are arming this massacre. What are you going to actually do? Spare me the words that are empty, and please tell me what actions you will take.
Deputy, my words are not empty. And I believe in substance in this issue, not words. And I've had a lot of words in this House and across the floor of this House. I'm about substance in this, and I'm about impact, and I believe Ireland can have impact, small and all as we are, and we are having impact. And we're one of the few countries that have already made a robust legal submission to the International Court of Justice in respect of the UN seeking an advisory opinion in terms of the illegality or the legality of Israel's occupation. And the Attorney General gave a very robust and very effective performance. That's action, Deputy. Very few other countries are doing that. I already outlined to you the action we've taken in respect of UNRWA. And in respect of recognition, I answered earlier in the House. And I said to you earlier, we are working, that's action, working with the Arab Peace. And we've discussed this with them. What's the optimal time for recognition? When would it have most impacts? It's only something you can do once. You can only do it once. Okay, you can I'm telling you, the best time, I believe the best optimal time is following the publication of the Arab Peace Initiative, and in terms of developing a political track whereby a number of European countries together could, on the back of that, and in tandem with that, that's far more effective. And I wish, Deputy, look, this idea of trying to score points or sort of suggesting you're more virtuous than everybody else in the House on this question, I think that we need to dispense with that kind of approach here.
Thank you, Taoiseach.
That we all want this to end.
We're over time.
But I genuinely believe Ireland can have impact and is, and we're using every possible forum, diplomatic, legal, political, to end this and to have impact.
Tá méid bogad raig go dtí an chéad ceistile ó Ceachta Cathal Berry.
Carla agus díhuit Háiste. Háiste, bhfuil labhairt freisin faoi Cathal siúla in Gaza faoi láthair. I would also like to speak about the situation in Gaza today, if I may. And I want to focus on the international humanitarian operation that is airdropping food supplies by parachute directly onto the strip. Just doubling on the previous speaker, I would absolutely be in favour of, and I think it's far preferable that there be a permanent ceasefire, to be a prisoner exchange and direct humanitarian access on the ground. But while these negotiations are ongoing for that to take place, I think as an interim solution, this is something that's very, very viable and very, very worthwhile, and I think it's something that Ireland should look at. I think there's going to be consequences to any action Ireland takes. If Ireland expels the Israeli ambassador, they'll just expel our ambassador. If Ireland tries to slap sanctions on Israel, they'll just slap sanctions on Ireland back. And not only that, I think other countries would probably join them, and other corporations would probably do so too. And if Ireland engages in certain legal practices, I think life on the ground will become very, very difficult for our troops, for our humanitarian workers, and our diplomats. And I think to such an extent that they may not be able to carry out their vitally important function. But the only consequences to Ireland involving itself in this type of a humanitarian airdrop by parachute operation is that women and children will be fed. And I think an added bonus is that it will be very, very symbolic, and it would send a very, very powerful and pragmatic message to both the current Israeli government and also to the Knesset as well. So the reason I raised this, Taoiseach, is there's been a number of media comments over the last week or so that Ireland is considering participating in this operation. So I guess my first question is, are those media reports true? Is Ireland considering being involved in this humanitarian parachute operation? The second question is, my understanding is we don't have the technical capability in our Air Corps at the moment. Is that the case? I'm open to correction on that. Is that the case? Thirdly, if we are going to participate and we don't have the technical capability, what form is that assistance going to take? And then finally, I understand and I very much welcome the fact that an order has been placed to purchase a new military transport aircraft. It's being assembled in Spain at the moment on an assembly line, but that won't be here for 15 months. is the Taoiseach's understanding that that new aircraft will have the capability to deploy pallets mid-air in future? And if it's not the case, would the Taoiseach consider including that to the tender? Because I think it's very, very important. The direction of travel geopolitically at the moment, Taoiseach, is very unreassuring. And if we don't, it's very unreassuring, the direction of travel from a geopolitical point of view on the planet. And I think this is a capability that Ireland should certainly try to acquire as soon as possible. Thank you very much, Taoiseach.
Yeah, first of all, just to say to you that I agree with much of what you have said, and just to say, come very quickly, yes, we are actively exploring the possibility of Ireland contributing to this multinational effort, and Jordan in particular has been leading this in organising airdrops, and I have spoken to Foreign Minister Safadi on this a week or two ago, specifically on this question. We speak a lot on other issues, and we're actively now engaged with Jordan. It's not an issue at all of technical capacity or anything like that. Jordan obviously has a lot of experience interlocking with the Israeli government in terms of the airspace there and so on. You understand the issues that arise there. But we're working in partnership with Jordan, and we're actively exploring that. But what is important, Deputy, is that that should not distract from Israel's obligations. The most effective and only way to really get meaningful volumes of aid through is through the corridors and to open up the checkpoints and so on, to open up Gaza, to allow far more trucks to get in on the ground than is getting in at the moment. The European Union have done about 41 air bridges, but that's via Egypt through. So Leonardovich, who's a fine commissioner, he's a humanitarian commissioner, Commissioner Leonardovich, forgive my pronunciation at times on that, but he's been very, very proactive on trying to get humanitarian aid into Gaza. And I've met with him and discussed this with him and the centrality of UNRWA in terms of getting that aid across. So whilst I think the airdrops in some countries have done the airdrops, we're working with Jordan and we're exploring, and we will be supportive in that respect. Of that you can be certain. But we're very conscious also that they cannot be used as an excuse, if you like, or because you don't get the same volume, and there's also operational issues in terms of getting it to people once they're dropped and so on like that. But nonetheless, it's vital now in northern Gaza, for example, where the UN agencies are not working, they're not able to get in there, they're not effective, they're not getting stuff through. But really, it's the opening up on a full-time basis of the border to allow far more trucks to get through. On the capability question, the new C295W, I think that's what you were referring to, that will have it will be capable of transporting and deploying palletized cargo from the air, and it can be configured with the required cargo handling system, and is equipped with a rear cargo door which can be opened in flight. And the aircraft avionics system is also capable of being programmed with the various parameters to allow for the accuracy required with aerial delivery operations. The considerations here are more on the, dare I say, the political or the practical level in terms of working with the Jordanian government on the specifics of the getting aid in and whatever we can do to get aid in through that route that Ireland would purchase and support.
No, look, I very much agree with you and both Deputy Cairns as well, that the key is to get the ceasefire and to get the volume of aid through. Absolutely, 100%. I want to take this opportunity to commend the King of Jordan as well. He's a former paratrooper, he's a former Special Forces officer. It's unusual that a head of state will have that background, so he actually knows what he's talking about. But also doubling on what Deputy Cairns said, if we could do something practical, like perhaps even flying food out to Jordan and then leaving on the runway so that another nation could drop that food in on our behalf. And I think that's something that's certainly worth considering as well. So I'm glad that consideration is being taken for this, Taoiseach, and I think we should absolutely do as much as possible from a practical point of view to assist the people on the ground. Thank you very much, Taoiseach.
It has been actively pursued, and I'll come back to the Deputy and to deputies when that progresses somewhere, but it's been actively pursued by the Irish government with the Jordanian government. And I met with King recently. I met with when I was recently in Jordan. He's very appreciative, and the Jordanian government is very appreciative of the role that Ireland has taken internationally at the various fora, and particularly within the European Union. And I would say this, that in terms of earlier questions, like, the mood has changed within Europe. Like, 26 countries last week were prepared to have sanctions against the violent and extreme settlers. Only one country objected, Hungary, and earlier there was a question in terms of taking travel bans. We're hoping to do travel bans and asset freezes, but it would be better if we could get the EU 27. So we're going to make one final effort at the next fact. Can we get full agreement? Because an asset freeze would be far more effective than a travel ban for some of these individuals who are doing terrible things in the West Bank in displacing Palestinian communities and schools and so forth. So, as you say, the King of Jordan has a lot of experience, and it's interesting that you say that, because he did discuss kind of issues like that with me when I met him on the last occasion I was in Jordan in September.
So, Ryan Ishkuji and Keshtiarnuk, Danny Healy-Rae.
Thank you very much, I wish to raise the serious predicament that many farmers find themselves as a result of continuous pressure from the Greens and your government. First being the proposed 25% reduction in emissions, resulting in a cull of 200,000 cows by 2030, carbon tax, the cost of carbon tax. Then we have the Chinese boasting that they are increasing their herd by over 1 million cows this year. The Nature Restoration Bill, which was passed in the EU Parliament on February 27, supported by all government MEPs, including our own local MEPs, Sean Kelly and Billy Kelleher. This was very disappointing. This bill sets out that 20% of our land and sea areas must be taken out of food production and re-wetted by 2030. This could actually mean that homes could be flooded. Minister Patrick O'Donovan is very concerned and says that this was not thought out properly. The this will also affect smaller farmers along the western seaboard areas like South and North Kerry that benefit from the 1945 arterial drainage and other granted schemes, and by their own hard work, their own sweat and blood, they slaved to make their places productive. Now in one foul swoop, all their work will be nullified, wiped out all because of the Greens' agenda and your lust and quest for power. Then we have the reduction in the nitrates derogation demanded by the EU, which our government didn't defend properly, means many farmers will have to cut production. Cull cows as they can't rent or buy additional land is too expensive. Small farmers won't be viable. I know one farmer that will have to reduce his cows from 58 to 48. It won't be viable for him to continue. Why is it that the same focus of attention isn't being placed on local authorities and Irish Water, who are also polluting streams, and rivers all over the country, as many treatment plants are overburdened? Several treatment plants in Kerry need improvements, and sewerage extensions and treatment plants need to be built where there are none. I attended a meeting in my van last Friday night where over 200 people launched their local development plan. The whole thing hinges on a new treatment plant, or the present-day treatment plant being extended. And they're pleading and begging for a treatment plant to be placed in my van. Suckler farmers and beef bull breeders are deeply upset after building up efficient, sustainable breeds. All that work is compromised following the ICBF changes to the star ratings, demoting Shirley and Limousine and promoting Dexter's. Many farmers have been disallowed from claiming back VAT from much needed improvements on their farms. More wanting to build extra storage can't even get planning. We have the most sustainable and efficient system of producing beef and dairy in the whole world on a fresh grass-based system.
Thank you. Get a chance to come back.
Well, first of all, I want to thank the Deputy for raising these issues, and could I say more generally that food production is essential, and in the context of climate change, resilience in our food production system and food security is absolutely essential. So rather than undermining our food production system, we'll be increasing it, because tá gír gá an chorus a hreisiú agus a dhéanamh níos láidre. And so in that context, as you know, we work with the farming community, and the Minister of Agriculture does as well. And you know, 1.5 billion in a flagship environmental scheme. The Acre scheme was developed by the Minister. It's the Agri-Climate Rural Environment Scheme. And what's interesting in that, Deputy, there was exceptional demand for that. About 46,000 applicants, farmers, who wanted to be part of that and taken into tranche 1. And Minister McConalogue announced yesterday that all of the more than 9,000 applicants to tranche 2 of the scheme will be accepted, bringing the total number now of participants in acres to approximately 55,000 farmers involved in an agri-climate rural environment scheme. And what that shows is farmers are up for engaging with government to do the right thing. And I was last year in Timoleague, where there was a project there where in a catchment area, Kilbritton, Timoleague and Barryroe and others, who monitor the situation in relation to nitrates. And it showed the degree to which farmers were facilitating research on their farms in terms of water quality and subsoil types and so on. And there was an education for me to be there. And I listened last Saturday morning to Boucher Hayes and the countrywide programme, an eloquent farmer from North Cork near the border with Kerry, having a similar project there, and saying how he regards himself as a guardian of the landscape, and how it's important that from a nature perspective, that it's important for food production that you have good husbandry, if you like, of the land, and that you protect the land, and you create, that biodiversity is important to food production. And so I think sometimes an impression is given that farmers are against this and against that. Many, many farmers understand this and get this in terms of the need to ensure for the long term a food production system that will facilitate, that will not unduly or will not undermine biodiversity, or indeed also prepares to enable us to adapt to climate change. Because climate is going to, my worry that climate change is happening. I know you might have a different view. Climate change is happening, and I've been in Galway and elsewhere, and the flooding that has happened is damaging food production systems. So we've got to adapt. And some of the ways of adapting are natural methods of adaptation, and that's why healthy ecosystems matter for food and food security. And that's why I think you need to be more balanced in terms of the nature restoration law, because I think there's a lot of positives that could come out of that nature restoration law. It's going to take time, obviously, to implement. It's not immediate, but it could be a positive too in terms of making sure that we've a sustainable food production system for the long term.
Look, Taoiseach, some farmers will survive in the Golden Vale and the places like that, but the places that I'm talking about have poorer type soils, and many of these smaller farmers are going to be wiped out. And what they can't understand is, and we're all under the one sky, Taoiseach, how is it that the Chinese can increase their dairy herd by 1 million cows this year alone, and they're increasing their herds in South America and cutting down the Amazon forest? How is it that all that is happening under the same sky? So the Chinese can increase and everything is grand. Once our dreamer of a Minister, Eamon Ryan, will be happy, our carbon footprint will be down, and the Chinese will be up, that will be fine. And you see, the fishing industry is gone, and almost gone, nearly wiped out because of inaction, and agriculture is the next. Because when farmers have to cut back so much, no longer are they viable then, and they can't stay in the land. And it's a struggle at present. And then what do we do to farmers' sons and daughters in recent days? Only change the category for driving of a license for driving a tractor. And the question that I'm asking you here, they're saying you must have an Arctic license, a lorry license for the drive a tractor, do certain types of work. I'm asking you, Taoiseach, will them same lads be able to do the driving test on a tractor and get an articulated license for it? Because that's turn it around. If you're demanding that they must have an Arctic license for to drive a tractor, I'm asking you, will you allow them to do the test on a tractor?
Deputy, we're over time and we're on the wrong road.
First of all, I'd say to Deputy that the fishing industry is not gone at all. Obviously Brexit did impact. Agriculture is certainly not gone. Because if you look at any relationship we have with most countries in the world, and you look at the export table, all you see is a rise in Irish exports of agricultural produce. So, for example, China is importing Irish milk products and dairy products for quite some time. Sorry, they will be. There will be. You see, this is kind of exaggeration, saying it's dead and gone. It is exaggeration to the chair. And the bottom line is, they've lifted the beef is also being exported to China. And anywhere I've been as Minister for Foreign Affairs, I'm invariably accompanied by someone with Board BIA with new product lines and exporting to new markets. So I think we need a bit of balance and proportion. In relation to the farmers in your area, I take your point. But that's where we do need, through the new Common Agricultural Policy and the next Common Agricultural Policy, that we support farmers in disadvantaged areas, which the Acre Scheme does actually in a lot of areas, and other schemes in terms of biodiversity schemes. I would increase the funding in those schemes, and that's why the carbon tax came in, to allow us to give ring-fence funding to farming. So, for example, if you have to protect a rare species on your land, that you're adequately compensated. Not just for 1 year or 2 years, but you're adequately compensated for a long time, so that we protect our biodiversity. So it's about incomes, getting incomes to farmers, and we're determined to do that.
You say you're traveling the world, and you
we're talking up the top. Tánaiste, please. Deputies and Tánaiste, please. Thank you. We're talking up Moshe the Hella on Tánaiste freshen. Tá méid bogar Ryanis, Shinjera le Kestana on a January, August Tá méid bogar Ry Guji, Kestana module, Raktiokta Tá Gelta, August policy realtas, Sus Gonome the one.
Last week, it was confirmed for the first time that the British state agents were involved in the murder of Sean Brown, and that up to 25 people can be linked by intelligence to that murder. I want to commend the family of Sean Brown, who have remained steadfast in their pursuit for justice and the truth for over 27 years. Revelations of collusion between MI5 and loyalists this week resulted in the coroner halting the inquest. The coroner did this because the MI5 has refused for over a year now to supply the coroner with vital information it has in relation to the killing. The coroner has now called on the British government to order a public inquiry into the killing of Sean Brown, and Sinn Féin supports that call, Tánaiste. So can I ask you, on behalf of the Irish government, have you or anyone else within the government been in contact with the British since the coroner's call? And if not, can the Irish government intervene speedily to ensure that the British government knows that this state stands with the Brown family in their pursuit of justice and supports the call for a public inquiry?
The state does stand with the family of Sean Brown, and I'm aware of the coroner's call, and that he has decided he can no longer carry out an Article 2 compliant inquest, and he wrote to the Secretary of State seeking a public inquiry. And I would support that, but I've asked my officials to meet with the family as soon as possible to hear their concerns and how we can support them. I am aware that an interim report of Operation Canova is due to be published tomorrow by the PSNI, and I welcome the strong focus in that investigation on victims and their families, about which John Boucher spoke, and when he led that team, and that his successor, Sir Ian Livingstone, has also said guides him as the new lead. And many of the victims said this to me, that they were very impressed with the manner in which John Boucher carried out the investigation into Canova. And the needs and victims of victims have always been to the fore of our government's response, hence why we took an interstate case in respect of that.
Dr. Duncan Smith.
Yeah, we will.
No, we're over time. You'll have to come back. Dr. Duncan Smith. Dr. Duncan Smith, Moshe the Hella. Dr. Duncan Smith, uninterrupted, please. Or else I'm just going to not continue.
Tánaiste, I'd just like to open with expressing our sincere condolences with the family of Saoirse Ruan. Young Saoirse touched the hearts of the nation when she appeared on the Late Late Toy Show in 2020 and spoke about her experience with cancer. Cancer, as you know, Tánaiste, is a disease that has impacted every family in this country in some manner. We need to be doing everything possible to work towards a world in which this is not the case, and this means that we need a strong, funded national cancer strategy. This is a priority, I must say, as well, of the Oireachtas cross-party group on cancer. March is the month where we think and fundraise for cancer, with the 22nd of March being Daffodil Day, the biggest fundraising day for the Irish Cancer Society. I would like to ask the government to mark this day, the the 22nd of March in 2024 with an early and firm commitment that we will see an increased and ring-fenced multi-annual funding provision for our national cancer strategy in budget 2025 and beyond. Could you be able to make that commitment in this year?
Thank the Deputy for his comments, and we have spoken earlier about the inspirational legacy that young Saoirse has left, and our sympathies are with Saoirse's family. And to say that I would argue that since we started national cancer strategies in the late 90s and right through 2000, with various progress being made, there has been a transformation in terms of cancer care in this country, which has led to significant reduction in mortality and growing outcomes, good outcomes in terms of survival of a whole variety of cancers, which is to be welcomed, which I think emphasises the need for continuing both the strategic approach to health. And the latest, I referred deputies to the latest publication from the Department of Health, Health Ireland, which shows dramatic improvements on cancer and heart disease, all because of national strategies.
Thank you,
and yes, they do need to be funded on a multi-annual basis, and I support that.
Nothing the government is doing seems to have an impact on affordability. In fact, all your policies seem to be designed to do one thing, to drive prices even higher. The figures say it all. Since the government took office, house prices have increased by 25%. That's an increase of nearly €70,000 since 2020. Rents for new tenancies are up by more than €4,200 per year. So people now have to come up with an extra £4,000 per year for rent while trying to buy a house that costs an average of €70,000 more than before this government took office. That is your government record on housing. Taoiseach, you say you're interested in delivering affordable homes, but your government has missed its social and affordable housing targets every year. We're still waiting for you to publish the figures for last year. When will you publish them? What is the delay?
Sorry, we have exceeded our targets on house building this year, up close to 33,000, last year in 2023. Well over, I think, up to 140,000 houses have been constructed since we came into government last year, with a record 10,000 social houses, 10,000 in 2022. And last year we have delivered 12,000 social housing. So we're now getting to a stage where social, and we have, and just let me finish please, and then in terms of the First Home Scheme and in terms of the Help to Buy scheme, we've now reached a stage where we're at record levels in terms of the drawdown of mortgages for first-time buyers. But we have to do more, because population is increasing and we're working extremely hard with a variety of measures to increase affordability and to enable young people to be able to afford a house. We know we're not there yet, and an awful lot more needs to be done. But there's no doubt that there's been a very significant change in terms of what's happening in the last 3 years. Post-COVID.
We're over time. Thank you. Deputy Richard by Barrett.
It is, in my opinion, shameful that the Taoiseach, other government and indeed opposition representatives are going to the White House to celebrate Patrick's Day with Joe Biden when he's complicit with the genocidal massacre Israel has conducted against the people of Gaza. But it would be even worse if the figures recently revealed about a massive jump in flights carrying weapons across Irish airspace had anything to do with the massacre in Gaza. There has been a very significant jump last year over previous years in flights going through Shannon mostly carrying weapons, and there was a particular jump in October of last year, 180 flights in October of last year. Now what I want to know is is that a coincidence in terms of the escalation of US military support for Israel's genocidal slaughter in Gaza? Are we checking this? Are we complicit with the genocide?
First of all, Deputy, I don't believe it's shameful for the Taoiseach to go to the White House. The Palestinian ambassador believes we should go to the White House. And we should, and I didn't interrupt you. Please. And I went to Washington 3 weeks ago, met with officials in the White House, met with senators and Congress. Why? to give them more perspective, but also to get their sense. And I'd say you won't like to hear this, notwithstanding everything and the politics of America and Israel and the strength of Israel in American politics. A lot of American politicians want this to end, and they want it to end quickly. That's the first point. I think you lack some degree of credibility in the sense that you correctly condemn what's happening in Gaza, but you've never ever publicly condemned what Hamas did on October the 7th. And in fact, your party and others have used language that is tantamount to condoning what Hamas did, or at least you give a background. This is the backdrop to why the attacks on October the 7th happened. And thirdly, no weapons are going I'm sure going to Gaza via Shannon.
We're over time, thank you. We're moving on to the next group, the regional group. No? The regional group? No? Okay. You want to waste the opportunity? We'll move on to the rural independence.
Driving tests taking place in Clonmel town and driving test centre this week. Last year, you blazed the glory, you said you were appointing 75 new testers across the country. That never happened. In actual fact, the opposite happened in Clonmel Test Centre, where one excellent tester was left go. So the only testers in Clonmel now, the only one tester, is on annual leave this week. So not one test, not count of one, will be carried out this week in Clonmel Drive Test Centre. This beggars belief. If the RSA out there passing rules and coming up with new changes every day of the week, and they won't recruit and retain adequate testers, so that people that want to go to work, want to go to college, want to do anything to get on the road, because we don't have public transport in the countries, you know, very, very little. And the RSA are allowed to do this. They have contracts with the government. They should make honour them. And not telling us they recruited 75. There are half of that number they didn't recruit. And then they left go, as I said, 7. One in Clonmel. Sure, it beggars belief that they can do this. And with people waiting 6 months for tests, all of South Tipperary and Westwater to come into the Clonmel Centre. And we have good testers there. And now they've been neglected.
I think the Deputy Department of Transport did respond swiftly, and Jack Chambers, the Minister, has been very active on this, and 75 additional driver tester posts were sanctioned only in March of last year. That's only 12 months ago. And that's in addition to the 30 permanent testers who were previously sanctioned in July of 2022. So the total sanctioned driver tester posts now is 205. Obviously, there's time in getting recruitment and so on. But that 205 figure is now double the 100 sanctioned driver testers posts in June of 2022. So you should at least acknowledge that. And the person in Clonmel is on annual leave, is entitled to take annual leave. I hope you accept that. There's a significant reduction in the national average waiting